beautiful Tempe, Arizona. This is Fast with Robert Ferguson, presented by the Center for American Institutions. Joining me today from all the way over in the law school, the Sandra Day O'Connor Law School here at Arizona State University, is Liam Nelson, who's a first-year student over there. Liam, thank you for joining.
Morning. Pardon me, good afternoon, actually. Thank you for having me.
Uh, Honestly, it's great to have you here. Liam, do you want to maybe tell everybody a little bit about yourself so they can get a firmer idea of who they have speaking to them in their ears right now?
For sure. So, my name is Liam Nelson. Thank you again for the introduction, Professor Ferguson. I am a first year student at the law school, but I have been a student at ASU for about 5 years now. I completed my undergraduate at ASU in history, Japanese, and international relations. And then I came to the law school and began to focus on more domestic and interstate issues in the United States. So, particularly in water law and urban planning and zoning is the focus that I'm looking at for these next few years and where I'm hoping to guide my career as well. And recently, for the purposes of this podcast, I participated in a Model UN conference here at ASU. It was our first collegiate conference, actually, and I ran the Colorado River Compact Committee. So we had 7 students representing 7 states from the Colorado River Basin who were here to renegotiate the Colorado River Compact, originally negotiated and signed in 1921 and 1922. And so that is what I'm here to talk about today. And thank you for having me.
Well, no, really great to have you here. So your background, you mentioned is your undergraduate background. You did a lot of work in international relations. How
Yes.
does studying international relations give you any insight into this interstate analysis?
uh, there have been issues, particularly surrounding water and international waterways, that are fairly similar to what we see in the United States here. The fortunate thing, I suppose, for the states of the United States is that they have a federal government that can kind of be, well, the arbiter and the enforcer between the states. In the international scene, it doesn't quite exist that way. You have the United Nations, you have a litany of different international treaties that govern different infrastructure works and different water agreements, rivers, etc. But they are almost ad hoc, so to speak. Whatever governs a given waterway between multiple states can be rely on a multitude of different treaties between those states, between states that aren't even involved. Take, for instance, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a major dam on the Nile River. I forget which branch of the Nile River, but it's the one that originates and flows through Ethiopia. And Ethiopia's construction of this dam has brought a quite a contention between Ethiopia and Egypt specifically, as well as Sudan, to the extent that they're currently able to project themselves towards that issue, given all the other circumstances that Sudan faces at the moment. And so, in the international sense, you get to see perhaps an even more extreme and more tense version of what you see between the different riparian states in the United States.
Right. And I mean, I can imagine if you're Sudan or if you're Egypt, I mean, such an enormous dam is going to have tremendous consequences for your ability for irrigation, hydroelectric power of your own, not to mention probably drinking water, and even then, and transportation.
Yes. And again, it's almost like a distillation of what we face here in the Colorado River Basin, because Egypt is probably one of the most single river dependent countries on earth. being a majority of their perhaps 150 million or so people live along the Nile River. Um, and it presents a
And
litany of issues.
primarily
Yes,
arid or desert.
yes, certainly.
Okay, so are you from Arizona originally?
I am. Yes, I'm from Peoria, Arizona, up in the Northwest Valley. I tend to call it suburban wasteland. To as lovingly as I can say those words, the development of Phoenix is particularly wide, particularly expansive, which poses its own issues in addition to how we use water.
Sure. So, no kidding. Okay. So, for those who don't live in the Southwest, are you able to maybe explain a little bit of the importance of the Colorado River to not just, let's start with Phoenix. Let's just start with the valley. What can we, I mean, the Colorado River itself comes nowhere near the valley.
Yes, that's
So,
right.
can you explain to listeners maybe living, outside this area, what is the importance of the Colorado River to the valley's millions of residents?
So the Colorado River has kind of a confluence of importance with different water sources in Arizona, but each of those water sources are critically important, and that is reflected in the decades of interstate negotiation and Supreme Court litigation. Um, so Phoenix, for instance, gets a lot of its water from the Gila River, which is actually a tributary of the Colorado River, but has its own kind of special status. Um, the Colorado River itself and groundwater. Those are kind of the three main sources of water. And then we recycle a lot of our water too and use those for different purposes aside from drinking so that we can be as conservationist as possible. Um, but to give a sense of how important the Colorado River itself, and again, pardon me, a sense of how important the Colorado River is to the people of Phoenix is that we have been in a prolonged, almost fight over this river with other states for over 100 years now. At least as far as the legal record goes, it's probably extended further from that. Um, and only in the 1960s, so it took us between 1944, 1941, when Arizona finally signed the Colorado River Compact, and 1964, when we were able to set up the legal basis for the Central Arizona Project, which is the major kind of extension of infrastructure works that allows us in Phoenix and Tucson and those areas to take water from the Colorado River to these cities. So it
Right.
presents a major set of water for these regions, and any water source that you have is incredibly important and needs to be managed. And there is a extremely complex uh, legal arrangement that is perhaps not common to any or many other states for essentially all sources of water in the state of Arizona.
Sure. So, the Central Arizona Project is basically, I mean, it's more than this, but it's basically a giant canal
Yes,
that connects.
essentially.
I think it's Lake Havasu right through, which is one of the two main reservoirs of Colorado River water in the Southwest, that connects it through the major population centers of Arizona.
Yes.
And so it's again, a huge canal, hundreds and hundreds of miles, carries an unbelievable amount of water through the state. And then you also mentioned, you got groundwater and you have Gila River water, and I think is there Salt River water too?
I want to say the Salt River is close to or part of the Gila River.
Yeah, I think it is too.
My geography
But
is not quite that
that's okay.
great at this
That,
moment.
that, that's okay. But anyway, I mean, the water, depending on where you live in the valley, up to 100% of your water might be coming from the Central Arizona Project and the Colorado River. So especially if you live, I think it's North Scottsdale, particularly like
Mm,
up in the north part of the valley, like a lot of you, almost all of your water is coming from the Colorado River. And Phoenix as a city is expanding, it's developing, it's, the whole area, not to, without getting into the debates over data centers and some of the other things, I mean, it's an exploding area economically. And so having some ability to project and to predict and have some stability over future water access is critical to the economic development of this area. And not just this area, I mean, New Mexico, Nevada, California, Southern California, um, you know, Utah, Colorado, all of these states, but particularly the lower basin states, I think it's an even bigger issue.
yes.
Um, so, Liam, are you able to jump in a little bit and explain the difference between the lower basins? Actually, no, no. Can we go? Let's go back to the 1920s when this began. I get to call an audible here. Um, can you talk a little bit about the origins of the Colorado River Accord?
Yeah,
Let's,
so it's difficult to actually find reliable sources for the real beginning of the Colorado River Compact. In around 1917 or so, different officials from the southwestern states, led by some real estate mogul or businessman, we're not entirely sure how he was involved in this, but they formed the League of the Southwest. And so it was just a way for these different states to come together and talk about their policies, hopefully come to some kind of agreement, and develop with each other. And a lot of this, what they were talking about, was related to development in these states. The states were trying to develop their economies. Early 20th century, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada were still really reliant on these very extractive industries, whether it be mining, farming, ranching, etc. They didn't really have much of any urbanization. Phoenix might have had 20,000 residents, and that's a an optimistic guess for that time. Uh, but Arizona had even only become a state in the Union, and so had New Mexico only 5 or 6 years before that. And as they had multiple more meetings of this League of the Southwest, which again are not very well recorded or publicized, but you can find little tidbits that note that they did have these meetings, it became clear that a big theme of it, a big, at least for supporting the development, was going to be water. And so a attorney from Colorado that was part of these meetings, his name is Delph Carpenter, proposed having an interstate compact between the Colorado River Basin states to solidify the individual states' rights for water, and make sure that they could develop, use this water to help build up their cities or their industry or their agriculture, whatever you might have it, without having to squabble over water every single time because they would have an allocation. And just for a little bit of context, as far as interstate compacts goes, these are nothing new. Probably been a thing that's happening between states since before even the United States Constitution was signed, even during the Articles of Confederation era. And there are some that are still in force from that era, actually, which is pretty interesting. But anyways, Self Carpenter, he proposes an interstate compact, and then in 1921, Congress, the U.S. Congress, passes a resolution, and they give the thumbs up to the basin states. They say, yeah, you can have a compact, negotiate it, form whatever compact you're going to do, bring it back to us, and we'll most likely sign it. And then they have to put it through a few of the departments. Actually, fascinating little connection as to the different people that are famous people that are involved in the compact. The Secretary of Commerce at the time, who was kind of heading up this project after Delph Carpenter had proposed it, was Herbert Hoover. And so the states do their negotiations. They set a total discharge for the river that they expect and that they divide between the upper and the lower basin states. And then they say, okay, for the next 40 some odd years, or basically indefinitely, this is how we're going to split up the river. And each state will, actually not even each state, each basin will get a certain amount of million acre feet. And for those that are unaware, an acre foot of water is the amount of water that it takes to fill an acre of land a foot deep with water. And this measurement primarily exists because of farming. It was an easy measurement for irrigation. And so basically the gist of the Colorado River Compact is that they divide the river into an upper and lower basin, which is divided at Lee's Ferry, Arizona. And if you're not familiar with that, it's basically around Page, Arizona. Probably a easier way to look at that. So the lower basin is all of the Colorado River Basin that lies in California, that lies in Nevada, that lies in Arizona. Those are the lower basin states. And then the upper basin, yes.
Sorry, so and New Mexico's upper basin, right?
New Mexico is considered upper basin. And so New Mexico and Arizona, and to a lesser extent Utah, are unique to the compact in that technically they both have territory, so to speak, of the lower and the upper basins. But this is really only legally significant to Arizona, which receives a small portion of the upper basin allocation. And so the upper basin is essentially all of the Colorado River and its tributaries that flow into Colorado River above Lee Ferry. And that includes Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming.
Okay. So there seems to be, there's a division of interest here. The upper basin states have a very specific interest, and the lower basin states appear to have I don't want to say the opposite interest, but a conflicting interest.
Yes.
Can you explain that division?
So the upper basin states, as you can probably gather, are the headwaters of the Colorado River. They are where it originates. Colorado has the Rocky Mountains. Wyoming has the headwater of at least one of the major branches of the Colorado River. And so they are kind of the controllers, so to speak, of the Colorado River. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other major tributaries, such as the Gila River, as we mentioned, in the lower basin that flow into the Colorado River themselves. But a lot of the Colorado River flow comes from this upper basin. And so the lower basin states are almost dependent on whatever the upper basin, or at least the upper basin's agreement to a unified standard as to how they're going to manage their water. And generally, this hasn't been the source of most of the contentions in the Colorado River Compact in the past. Although you have seen these two groups kind of diverge in their management of the river, or just kind of silo themselves into their own groups. So there's actually a separate Colorado River Compact between the upper river basin states. I wouldn't say maybe not separate, but supplementary. It takes the very general allocations that the main Colorado River Compact makes, and it allocates them between those states themselves. But what you'll see in these recent years is it's become kind of a contention between not only the water resources departments of each of these states, but now the governors are starting to get involved, which is actually pretty uncommon in the past century of negotiations on this subject. And there's a big contention or a big question of what when we get into these shortages, are the upper basin states going to be able to just prioritize themselves, especially in impounding water along the Glen Canyon Dam or their own reservoirs further up the river, pardon me, to the detriment of the lower basin states?
Right. You've got every state wants as much water as they can get,
Yes.
right? And but ultimately the lower basin states, to some degree, without an enforced accord, are up to are at the mercy of the upper basin states, because again, as you mentioned, they can impound water at whatever level they want, to whatever level their infrastructure can manage. And so what has caused this? You mentioned the governors are involved now. Over the last few years, why is this such a hot button issue again?
Well, I think it's obviously one issue that's at the top of a lot of people's minds is climate change. And we are in the middle of one of the worst droughts that this region has seen in probably over a millennia, even likely even worse. I mean, we're yet to see, but likely even worse than the drought in the 1500s that kind of destroyed the Huhugam civilization. That is actually where Phoenix gets its name. Um, so there's climate change, there's lessening or at least less certain, less predictable precipitation, which means a lower flow along the Colorado River. And that's compounded by the fact that the numbers in the original compact are actually an overestimate of the actual flow of the Colorado River, even at that time. And so not only have we been routinely over withdrawing water, or at least over expecting water from the Colorado River for the past century, but now the reliability of even the flow that was the reality in 1920s is even lower now because of these climatic factors. And in 2007, we had recognized this. So this isn't like just hitting us in the face now. The states came to a set of emergency guidelines on how to manage Lake Powell and Lake Mead behind the Glen Canyon and the Hoover Dams to deal with these diminished precipitations and diminished flow along the river. Unfortunately, those emergency guidelines, emergency measures are set to expire in late 2026 or otherwise have already expired. And so the states are, when these expire, they would revert to the essentially regular Colorado River Compact appropriations, which, as I've established, are very hopeful. They're very above however much water actually exists in the river, and the states are kind of scrambling to put together new plans to at least revive in some manner those 2007 guidelines, because if they don't, then we could just end up making the situation along the Colorado even worse.
Right. Right. Okay. So an attempt to renew or renegotiate the emergency provisions from 2007. And as
Yes.
you mentioned, you've got the governors of these various states, if not personally negotiating them, you have very senior people that are in touch with the governor that in these various states that are negotiating them. Um, and on top of that, of course, in many states, this is an election year for the governors.
Yes.
So there is some internal electoral pressure on them. I mean, I'm thinking of Katie Hobbs here in Arizona. Um, I don't know if Governor Paulus in Colorado is up again this year, but it's been interesting to see how these various governors with the various interest groups in the states have been trying to come to at least some sort of agreement. So my understanding is that the lower basin states are willing to accept mandatory cuts, but they want the upper basin states to make some mandatory cuts of their own.
Yes, that is generally the case, and I mean that's kind of always been a requirement of parity among the negotiating states. If the lower basin has to accept cuts, then they want the upper basin at least to accept some kind of restriction or limitation so that it doesn't seem like the lower basin is just getting the short end of the stick. And that's how the 2007 emergency guidelines went in some manner. It wasn't a necessarily guidelines that said, well, the upper basin gets this and the lower basin gets this. It was depending on how much precipitation there is and how much there is in each reservoir in a given year. Again, the Lake Powell and Lake Mead, then we will be able to withdraw this amount of water. And so it was intended at least to be kind of a flexible arrangement depending on the natural conditions of the river rather than a political agreement of saying, you get this much and we get this much. And in my personal opinion, that's at least a bit of an improvement from the original Colorado River Compact, because while different states might benefit or detriment a little more or less depending on the conditions, it's also more flexible than just and more realistic than
Sure.
simply saying one state gets this, one state gets that.
It also allows as a political issue, it also allows you to tell whatever story you want to tell if it's flexible.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. So, what's the role of the federal government in
Oh
these
boy. Okay.
negotiations?
The federal government has had a role in this since the very beginning. As I said, Congress had to pass a resolution that said, hey, we support you coming up with this compact in the first place. And for any interstate compact that is negotiated or changed, it has to be ratified or at least approved by Congress and then the individual legislatures of each of the states that are involved. And so, to that extent, the legislative branch of the United States federal government is involved. And then then that compact becomes an organ almost of federal law. So it is applicable federal law between these states. It's not just state laws in conjunction. Now that happens as well, but that's as far as compact goes. At the highest level, it is federal law.
But so that prevents, let's say, a state from violating it.
Right. Or at least, hopefully it does. And so because it is an organ of federal law, and there's more congressional stuff that I'll get to, when a state is purportedly violating it, another state under the compact can bring it up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And not only does the Supreme Court have original jurisdiction when it comes to two states litigating against each other, particularly in this case over water adjudication, in which case it uses the doctrine of equitable apportionment, but it also has original jurisdiction over cases of interstate compacts and whether they are being violated or followed or not. So the Supreme Court has involvement over that, and it has water issues, especially between Arizona and California, but I think this has involved every state in the compact. Those are just the two kind of headliner parties to these cases. Has been litigated in somewhere between 7 and 9 major cases over the past century. It's been since the 40s that we've been litigating this. And the kind of watershed, pun sort of intended, case on this was in 1963 between Arizona and California, and that set out the Supreme Court's apportionment for the lower states. So prior to that, there was no like numerical apportionment between the lower basin states, and then the Supreme Court said, pursuant to an act of Congress that established this, then you have these numbers. Each state has these numbers. And then that has been litigated. Various issues under that compact have been litigated ever since, until about 2006, when the Supreme Court released what is called a consolidated decree. And so they basically took all of these cases that they had and they combined it into one big order, and they said this is the governing law, at least as far as the Supreme Court has stated it, towards the Colorado River Compact. And then so back to Congress. Congress has passed multiple acts regarding the Colorado River Compact and how it is to be managed and how it is to be developed. And so the big one especially is going to be the Boulder Canyon Project Act, which starts the Boulder Canyon Project. And there's the Mexican Water Treaty of 1944, which governs how we apportion both the Colorado and the Rio Grande rivers with the country of Mexico. There's the Colorado River Storage Project Act of 1956, which helps establish a bunch of projects along the Colorado River, its funding and its infrastructure projects and whatnot. And then there was the Colorado River Basin Project Act in 1968, which is, again, more infrastructure. A lot of this congressional stuff after the original compact is just saying, hey, we're helping you with infrastructure in XYZ ways.
Right.
And that's roughly the extent of congressional action regarding this situation, regarding the Colorado River. There's been a few smaller acts that are not necessarily notable in this context. And so that's the judicial branch and the legislative branch. And then the executive branch is, of course, also involved in the Colorado River Compact and the Colorado River management. So a lot of or actually pretty much all of the infrastructure projects, particularly dams, on the Colorado River are controlled and managed to a major extent by the U.S. Department of Interior, specifically within the Department of Interior, the Bureau of Reclamation. And so that is kind of the part of the federal executive branch that has been charged with, by both Congress and the states, in managing water, in constructing these major infrastructure projects and dams and whatnot, and helping to coordinate between the states and do research and monitoring for Colorado River issues.
Right. And in fact, currently in the current negotiations over the renewal of the emergency provisions to the compact, the Department of the Interior has actually tried to set a couple of deadlines and has very recently, the secretary has involved himself in these discussions.
I believe that is correct. This is a fairly common occurrence, especially after about the 1980s. What the process that they're in currently is governed by the National Environmental Protection Act, I believe, NEPA. I'm not sure if I got the name right, but I got the acronym right, which sets up the the system of how these projects that have major environmental implications go through negotiations. So if you look it up, it's just called the NEPA process. But
Mm,
essentially, the core document that they're looking at here is the quote unquote environmental impact statement. And so that is what the Department of Interior has to develop in conjunction with the states in order for any major project or renegotiation of these provisions to occur to go forward.
right. Okay. Very interesting. All right. So, from what you've seen, at least in these negotiations of this, um, my understanding is that there's no sense of an agreement right now. That the Department of the Interior has set as February 16th deadline, but that's not going to be met ever. And ultimately, this expires, you said, at the end of the year or close to the end of the year.
Yes, I believe the and I wrote the issue book and I think I might have gotten the dates or the years mixed up, but the 2007 guidelines and also 2019 contingency plan that was kind of amended onto the 2007 guidelines are have either already expired at the beginning of this year or are set to expire around September, October, November of 2026.
Okay. Do you expect that they'll be able to come to any agreement?
Uh I don't necessarily think so. It or at least it doesn't seem entirely hopeful at this time that they will come to an agreement within that amount of time. I remember there was a meeting between the governors in D.C. within the past few weeks, I believe,
Yeah, it's
and
last week.
Governor Hobbs came out of it saying litigation is not off the table. And so if we see that litigation is still an option, then the chance that the states are able to come to an agreement within the next 8 to 12 months is looks slim. And if it does come to a matter of litigation, then we could be waiting until 2028, 2030 for that to happen. The original litigation took some 3 years and hundreds of hours of hearings and thousands of pages of and this is the 1960s case. So I don't see litigation as off the table either, and unfortunately, from a realistic perspective, I'm not entirely optimistic that we'll come to a comprehensive agreement. At least maybe there will be some very stopgap measures, but nothing too
Yeah.
sustainable in the long term.
Um, one of the things that's interesting about this, about this issue, and it's more common than is usually presented, I think, in the media, is that you've got the upper basin division, the upper basin states against the lower basin states, and this is old-fashioned politics before hyper-partisanship.
Yes,
Because you've got the lower basin states are California, Arizona, and Nevada, correct?
correct.
Right. All of which governed by Democrats, right? And then
Uh,
you've
it depends on as far as the governors go. Yes,
governors. Governors,
legislatures
different story,
different
sure.
case.
But governors, you know, all three, the three main proponent or the three main advocates for these states are all Democrats. And of course, and one of the chief leaders of the Upper Basin Party is Jared Polis, the Democratic governor of Colorado. And Hobbs and Paulus seem to be the ones who are most at odds with each other. And and very much, governing in the best interests of their state or negotiating in the best interests of their state. and not worried too much about partisan affiliation. And I think in this world where we so frequently just assume all issues fall down this neat blue-red divide, this is one of those issues that scrambles that up completely. And you'll have legislatures and, even in Arizona where you got a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, on this issue, while they may disagree over what apportionment looks like once it gets into the state, on they both want as much water as possible.
Yes.
And I think that makes it interesting. Now, how does that, and I think this is where your international relations background is so useful.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, that's no. I'll let you speak to that. I mean, how
Yes.
states' best interests are often can overcome partisan affiliations.
Yeah, so as you said, or as you've alluded to at least, water is an issue that does not respect party lines. And essentially, regardless of whichever party controls a state or its legislature or its executive branch, any party that controls a state is going to be interested in that state having as much water as they can get, or at least having a very secure, very concrete source of water for the future. And they often view any other state's accrual or pardon me, accrual of their own achievement of their own water source, particularly along the shared river, the Colorado River, to be a threat to their water rights and their water security. And so, regardless of it's basically every state for themselves, at least at the most extreme levels. And it really tests the limits of our federal system. And so, to give an example of this, in 1934, I believe, this was before the compact actually came into action. The Parker Dam was supposed to be constructed out between Arizona and California, and Arizona did not want the Parker Dam. They saw it as basically just a grant of water to California, to the Imperial River, or to the Imperial Valley irrigation district, and Arizona was dead set in preventing this from occurring. And to the extent that it almost provoked a war between Arizona and California. And this is one of my favorite stories, one of my favorite facts to bring up when talking about the history of the Colorado River Compact and its associated agreements and politics. So Governor Mower at the time, for whom the ASU's Mower Award, Mower Building, etc., are named, took the Arizona National Guard and he put them along the Colorado River on the Arizona side. He got a couple of steamboat operators or like ferry boat operators along the river. I believe her name was Nellie T. Bush, and formed the Navy to transport our National Guard troops over the river to the kind of early establishments of the Parker Dam and prevent the construction. It was fortunately it was resolved peacefully, and things continued, and there was not a war between the states. But we ended up with the Arizona Navy, the first Navy of a landlocked state in our country, and Nellie T. Bush was actually the first female admiral in American history.
That's amazing.
And to give you a context of how serious this was, and how serious it could become in the future, there was a simultaneous conflict over the Red River between Colorado and Oklahoma. They happened just about at the same time. And Germany at the time, and this is again 1934, so you know the government of Germany at the time. Allegedly, there was an internal memo in the German government that was passed along in reaction to these two river conflicts, saying the United States is going to have another civil war over resources soon here. And to
Hmm.
the extent to which that informed German decision making, we don't know. But it shows how big of an issue this seems to be, especially to outside perspectives, outside observers of the United States.
Hmm. Hmm. So speaking of outside the United States, you've also mentioned, and I'm glad you brought it up, that there are treaties that govern water use and shared water use between the United States and particularly Mexico.
Yes.
Um, so are you able to talk about that at all?
Briefly, yeah. So the 1944 treaty sets out essentially, I don't know quite as much about the Rio Grande, but I know a little bit more about the Colorado. It sets aside 1 million acre feet per year to the Mexican government or the Mexican state. And it also creates kind of this interborder body that meets every so often, usually annually if possible, to kind of review the river issues between these two states. And it's been doing so for decades, and it still meets at least occasionally. Um, and to some extent, the minutes of these meetings, or some of the things that have been actually agreed upon, do become enforceable law, or at least norms that are respected between the two countries. Um, so the name of the body that I mentioned is called the International Boundary and Water Commission between the United States and Mexico. And essentially, this commission is called to negotiate any or speak about any joint use of the waters for domestic and municipal uses, agriculture, energy, industry, navigation, fishing, hunting, essentially any beneficial use that the commission states. And I'll correct my number from earlier. It's actually 1.5 million acre feet from the Colorado River that is supposed to be reserved for Mexico.
Interesting. Okay. The lower basin states want to get mandatory cut, or at least Katie Hobbs. I don't actually know what Nevada and California have claimed, but I do know that Governor Hobbs has said that she's willing to accept more mandatory cuts on part of Arizona, provided that there's mandatory cuts from the upper basin states. And then, I mean, and again, I don't expect you to know this. I expect there might be some talk in future about reducing the Mexican apportionment, but that would be between the United States government and Mexican government, I guess, or
Right.
between the
Yeah.
various
So
states.
the states can talk about it, but they really don't have any authority
Any
as
authority?
far
Okay.
as the treaty goes.
Okay. Interesting. Um, Now, within Arizona, and again, didn't brief you on this, so I don't know if you know, but there is, there's water rights laws in which like certain
Yes.
individuals in certain sectors get first claim to water before others, right?
Correct.
Okay, are you able to talk a little bit about like who gets primary claims to water?
Oh, that is a very very complex field of law, especially in Arizona. Essentially, everywhere, most states in the West follow this notion of the doctrine of prior appropriation. And essentially, what that says is it's colloquially known as first in time, first in right. And so, if you are the first person to establish a homestead or something along the river, and you establish a water right, and you affect that water right by actually making some kind of diversion or like withdrawal from the river, and you put it towards a beneficial use, which is subjective between the state you're in sometimes, then you have established a water right. And so let's say I have a water right that is perfected. It is, actually established as of 1910. And then my neighbor, who let's say is upstream of me, has a water right from 1920. If the river doesn't have enough water to satisfy both of our water rights within the year, within any given year, then I, as the person with the senior or first in time water right, am going to be prioritized over that junior water holder, even if they're upriver of me. So if I have, let's say, 10 acre feet and they have 5, and there's only 12 acre feet in the river, and there's no other claimants, just for the sake of theory, I will get my full allotment of 10 acre feet, and they will only get 2. If there's only 8 acre feet, I will get 8, and they will get nothing. Now, state law probably provides some more intricacies towards that, and there is a strange way that groundwater is differentiated from
Riparian.
surface water, and there's also like a weird way where the boundary is drawn between what is surface water and what is groundwater. There's a thing called subflow, where essentially groundwater that flows with a river, but kind of like underneath the ground just a little bit, is considered to be subflow and is therefore linked to the water rights of the river itself.
Right. And so because of this, the way that the body of law is set up, what that means is that in Arizona, most of the people with the earlier water claims are farmers or agriculture because of the way that the state was established. And agriculture uses a lot more water than ultimately any other use in the state.
Yes.
And so this creates not only a challenge at the Colorado River Compact level, but at the state level. And I mentioned earlier, that there are some maybe some partisan differences between how they want water allocated at the state level, although they might agree at the interstate level. Is there, any movement to try to get farmers to reduce their water claims that you know of?
Not that I know of, and I would be hesitant to say reducing the claims.
Sorry, not the claims. Yeah. Yeah,
But
good point.
consumption, there, I couldn't tell you of a like unified movement as far as that goes, but there's always people that are calling for, hey, we have technologies that are able to make these farms a lot more water efficient while still giving us the same output. It's mostly a matter of how are we going to fund that, and do we have the political will to help farmers do that, or are you going to try and force them to without providing funding? And then what are the risks of just essentially destroying farmers and thus destroying a lot of the communities in the state of Arizona because farmers cannot uphold whatever regulation you might pass as far as their like technological irrigation requirements and that kind of thing.
I mean, and one of the good things about the all of the development recently is, I mean, I think there's a lot of fear mongering, I think, in the media about new development and that kind of thing. And I mean, as much as new development is going to require water, it's not going to require the type of water that agriculture needs.
Right. And Arizona as a state is actually, I mean, they have to be pretty good about their water use. Since the 1980s, or maybe the 1990s, the Arizona's per capita water consumption has only gone down. And it's gone down a pretty dramatic amount, actually. And so the main reason that you see stress on the water in Arizona is not because each person is using more water or each person is using water in a wasteful way. It's simply just because there are more people and there is more development. So it's really just a matter of continuing to focus on how do we make our water use as efficient as possible and as giving as little impact over the river as or other water sources as we can.
Right. Well, Liam, you know what? I really appreciate you coming on. It's been really interesting to chat with you about this. It's going to be, for those of us in the Southwest, this is going to be in the news. It's probably not always going to be a
Yes,
headline, but it's going to continue to be in the news. And
definitely.
hoping that some sort of agreement can be reached without too much litigation.
Yeah. Even though litigation is the American way, we want to certainly avoid it if we can.
Well, it becomes expensive to taxpayers if nothing else.
You bet.
All right. Well, Liam, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll have you on again as this story develops.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed being on here, and I hope everybody enjoyed listening.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Have a good